welcome Christina to the stage. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for sticking with us and what's been a really interesting day of talks. And I think what Lucy was talking about in terms of productivity and bringing digital adoption fits in perfectly with this panel. And I think while we've been talking about huge advancements in technology, it's really stark that while everybody's trying to become a tech superpower, a lot of companies in the UK, around a quarter, still aren't using basic digital tools. So I think when we're talking about tech, we need to talk about simplifying it, balancing, and closing that digital divide. And these problems are really persistent outside of capitals like London as well. So I've got a great panel here. There's quite a few of them, but I'm going to get them all to introduce themselves first and a little bit about their perspective on this. And so if you can introduce yourself and tell me, why do we have poor digital adoption here in the UK? And I'll start with you, George.
Thanks for the introduction. So, hi, my name's George Dibb. I'm head of the Centre for Economic Justice at IPPR. We're a progressive think tank based here in Westminster. I'll try and keep my opening remarks short because I think there's quite a lot of us and a short time to get through, and I appreciate everyone. It's the end of the day. I think it's a combination of two things. Partly putting the UK's poor technology adoption in a wider context of quite poor investment across the UK economy. We know that we need investment, private sector investment, to drive productivity enhancements, the adoption of new technology. The UK's private sector investment is consistently extremely low. It's way below the G7 average. In fact, we're the lowest investor in the G7 on terms of private sector investment. And I think that's partly not just due to the fact that firms themselves are not investing, but the fact that the government hasn't put in place a very clear strategy to help them do that. So I think the withdrawal of schemes like Help to Grow Digital is a real shame. Firms that are helping, policies that put in place assistance to firms, financial support, but also training are really welcome, because it's clear that simply having higher labour costs is not driving the investment that we need in productivity and in automation. You can see examples of that across a whole range of sectors, because it's not just about tech in firms across the economy, but in different sectors too. So when the UK had an industrial strategy, an attempt to put in place some long-term stability in terms of the UK economy, it took a very long time for any kind of assistance for the adoption of automation in manufacturing sector just to get put in place. That was the Made Smarter scheme. And by the time it was, the industrial strategy was already dead. It had been replaced by a plan for growth, and now it's been replaced by a growth plan. And we have another plan, another turn of political ideas. That kind of that constant political instability is very harmful. And lastly, I'd highlight that we do have a problem in the UK in terms of firm management, in terms of training out there, in terms of business management and firm management. The vast majority of firms who stand to gain the most, SMEs, aren't actually aware that they could be making productivity and cost savings through the adoption of technology. So that's a big problem too.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam Hawksbee. I'm Deputy Director of a think tank called Onward. You've got kind of think tank corner over here. We're a centre-right think tank. We do a lot of work on levelling up, on science and technology. I was previously Head of Policy to Andy Street, working up in the West Midlands, and I agree with a lot of George's point on the kind of macro, particularly around investment. I want to, in my kind of opening remarks, talk about some of the micro challenges we have and how we try and drive adoption in this country. And I think it's instructive to think about the law of diffusion of innovation, right? So for those who are unfamiliar, kind of bell curve, most innovative on one side, least on another. You've got about 2.5% of people who are your innovators that are probably already in line for a Vision Pro. You've got kind of 13.5% early adopters. I'll come back to those in a moment. 34% early majority, 34% late majority, and then 16% laggards. Those laggard firms probably need to fail. I think we've got a big problem in this country that we've got a lot of ghost and zombie companies. We need a bit of a wave of Schumpeterian competition for some of those firms that are low productivity, often carrying a huge amount of debt from COVID to collapse. I don't think we talk about that enough, that you need a kind of cycle of firms in the economy. Sometimes our tax environment doesn't do that. those innovators, they'll probably take care of themselves when it comes to adopting technology. I worry that our business support ecosystem focuses too much on those early adopters, what a kind of GP might call the worried well, people who recognise that there's an opportunity for them to adopt a new bit of kit and probably know their sectoral representative at the local enterprise partnership, have heard of Help to Grow Digital, have probably attended similar courses or similar programmes before. What we miss is that middle 68%, the early and the late adopters. How do you get to some of those folks? I think it's instructive to think about how individuals, consumers, might adopt bits of technology, particularly when they fall into that middle group. And it is often through a friend or a colleague or a child or a sibling, right, who says, I've used this new thing, it's been really useful for me, you should give it a go. And they will talk you through how to adopt that app or that new bit of technology or whatever else. Relationships, trust, the willingness to take a bit of a risk because someone's going to walk you through it is essential in adopting that technology. And I think that we can learn something in terms of our business support ecosystem from that insight, that what you would want is a process that is local, that leverages relationships that people already have. That might be with a trade representative organisation, that might be with a chamber of commerce, that might be with a non-tech or non-business focused organisation. In Birmingham, Citizens UK ran a fantastic programme about digital adoption for businesses in Lascelles, a really deprived area of the city with a very high ethnic minority population who were never going to go to a kind of national body. And yet what we have with Help to Grow Digital are schemes which are national, quite cold, and very often are not going to reach those communities. And so I think one of the reasons we've got very low digital adoption, and I really welcomed in the Tech UK plan today that 11th point about digitising and increasing adoption in laggard firms, and I think a form of tax relief is probably a good idea. The question needs to be who is going to be most aware of and take advantage of that tax relief. I would posit it's going to be the worried well, and those that are in that early and late majority will need some support to understand what sort of technologies they might use that tax relief for, how it might help them, and some support to adopt.
Thank you. We'll dig into that some more, but just to give our panellists the time to introduce themselves as well. Holly.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Whittles. I'm from Purple Frog Systems. We're a data analytics consultancy, and I'm also the National Policy Skills Champion for the Federation of Small Businesses. So I also wanted to touch on Help to Grow as an example of a scheme that had a fantastic idea behind it, but it was far too prescriptive. So for small businesses, because the choice of the programs was so limited, they found it really difficult to adopt it. So I was really excited about it, and then I looked at what I could access, and I'm like, well, I've already got a CRM, I've already got Making Tax Digital, I can't use it for anything. And also there's a tendency to rely on universities and academia to push these things out. And again, with Help to Grow, I was getting emails saying, would I like to join the cohort next week? And I'm like, well, I can't suddenly clear my diary next week to join your cohort for 8 weeks. So it's things like that where it's not quite joined up, and I think it needs to be easier for all types of businesses to access it. And FSB did some research into digital skills and digital adoption, and the result was that 48% of the businesses that answered the survey said that digital skills are a priority, and they've definitely got a problem with recruitment and trying to find those digital skills. So I think in terms of small businesses, we need to look at how people can access it. And things like rural connectivity, I'm from the West Midlands, there's a lot of people that can't even get Teams to work because they haven't got 3G, they haven't got broadband. So when we're talking about digital adoption, we also need to think about digital infrastructure in the UK.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Andreas Georgiou. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing at Sage. Sage is actually the UK's largest tech company. We provide accounting, payroll and HR software for small businesses around the world. I mean, I think when I think about, is the UK terrible compared to others in terms of digital adoption? For me, I think it's pretty bad everywhere. I think we're just marginally worse when you look at the statistics than others. And I think when you look at why is that the case, and you take it back to a kind of individual level, there's a huge amount of kind of inertia and established kind of practices with small businesses that's really hard to shake. So, if we want to make it a priority, the country has to make it a priority to want to improve digital adoption because it's part of our growth agenda. And the way in which we can do that, there are some carrots and there are some sticks. So the Help to Grow schemes, there's been various examples around the world where those kind of systems are just too complicated, voucher-based systems, they don't take hold. there are other ways where you can potentially do it better through, digital sort of growth funds and tax reliefs and things like that that are a little bit easier. But then I think you also do need to look at the stick side of the equation, which is, how the government can take a leading force in driving digital adoption through legislation and other things that we're seeing around the world sort of taking off now, things like e-invoicing. And while those might seem like a big burden up front, they deliver so many positive, follow-on effects in terms of providing visibility and connection between small businesses. So, I don't think we've made it a huge priority, and I don't think we've pulled all the levers that we can as a country.
I'm Darren Jones, Labour MP for Bristol North West, and I chair the Commons Business and Trade Committee. And as I'm last, I'm going to be very, very short. The reason that we have low digital adoption in the UK from a government perspective is for two reasons. One, because Whitehall is rubbish at product design, and two, because the incentives are all wrong.
Can I just press you on that a little bit more? How are the incentives wrong?
So the incentives would be right if business owners wanted to adopt the technology. And so the outcome, the evidence shows that they're therefore all wrong. So the follow-on question is, well, what should the incentives be? And how should they be different to what we currently have? I think the tax incentive approach is much better than the voucher-based approach, which was enormously over-engineered to death by Whitehall. But actually, I don't think it's just about tax incentives either. There have to be other incentives. We need to make it easier for people to know what they need, how to implement it, and what the impact is going to be on their business and their workforce. And the workforce should be involved in this discussion right from the very beginning as well. And there are a number of things there that government can do to help that. But actually, and I say this as a politician of the left, Whitehall needs to get out of the way, really. I mean, it needs to build the right incentive framework and then let the market deal with it. And unless the market can get this thing working, government isn't going to get it working.
I'm going to come back to government in a second, but Holly, I saw you nodding there. I mean, in terms of small businesses, is the incentives there? Like, do they want to be more digitally forward? And are there competing incentives as well at a time when budgets are constrained and everything else is going on at the moment?
I think they're sort of there, but with things like tax relief, if you're a plumber, for example, you can claim that if you wanted to do a course about plumbing, but you couldn't then apply it if you wanted to do a course about digital marketing. So I think some of those schemes need to think about those skills that we're trying to, because digital is covering every single sector. And as a business owner myself, I would love to see it include things like R&D. Why can't we put training and developing our workforce through things like that? So I think it's about looking at a model that works for all types of businesses.
Andreas, do you have something to add on that as well?
Yeah, so I think when I speak to small businesses, of course everyone wants to do produce better business results, be more productive. The technology for me isn't really the problem. The problem is the lack of kind of confidence and skills in the actual subject matter that the software is there to, or technology is there to solve. So if, we sell accounting software, the reason people might not engage with that isn't because of the accounting software, it's because they're scared of numbers and finance and they haven't understood. The same thing with digital marketing, things like that. So, if you want to tackle the adoption problem, you need to take a step and actually tackle that problem in terms of helping build that awareness and confidence and skill set that then encourages people to want to go and adopt the best tools so they can be the best at doing that thing. And at the moment, again, I don't think we have a great program for tackling that all the way back when you go back to kind of school curriculums and stuff. How many people actually properly learn about business skills, finance, and then can apply that in the real world? And when you speak to the younger generation now coming out of school, that's, far more than when I sort of left school. People are looking to go into business as their career. They want to start their own companies. They want to do things. So we need to be equipping people. And then obviously that goes all the way through into the established workforce and how you retrain and reskill people with initiatives like that, Holly.
Mm-hmm. George, what kind of policy intervention should there be?
So I think Adam is right that we have to break apart this group of people who are the ones that we can get to and are willing and able to make change, and those who aren't. And I think I very much agree that some of the firms that we're unable to help probably shouldn't be going on still. I think they should be replaced by firms who are willing to invest and innovate and be creative. I think we have definitely supported the establishment of a body that Productivity UK, whose responsibility it would be to be assisting firms to advertising and signposting very clearly some of those solutions. But I don't think it can be done easily. It's not a big national hammer that's going to hit every nail, right? Because asking a manufacturing firm to do some process innovation is very different to asking a hairdresser to set up a website where you can make online bookings. And the willingness and ability and incentives in those situations are just very different. So I would really agree with having something quite tailored, something that's very local and relationship based through local and regional systems of kind of business groups and through regional government to try and reach out to those firms.
Adam, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to kind of add some specificity to what I think those organisations should be. So kind of mayors and combined authorities have shown real promise on this. I think, Darren's absolutely right. The state needs to step back and get out of the way. But what it can do is seed fund some of those intermediary bodies that do that really important work. So whether that is a trade association that says, look, there's this very specific adoption gap in manufacturing, in retail, in hospitality, or whether that is, I don't know, a residents association or a particular area where there is a high street that has a group of businesses that haven't yet adopted a CRM. Some of this is about sharing fixed costs. It might be that a small number of small businesses want to club together in order to get a bit of kit or technology. We should have an ability to fund that, and that's unlikely to be a central government department, much more likely a local authority or a combined authority.
What do you think of that, Darren? I mean, when you say you need to step back, what should governments be doing? How much intervention should there be? Should it be funding, or should it be forcing some types of digital adoption?
There's not much money, and we shouldn't force people to do everything. And I'd be slightly nervous about councils and combined authorities. Some of the combined authorities are performing reasonably well in my view, some of them are not. And the governance and oversight of them is appalling. And so we just don't know really until it's too late whether the money's been spent well or not. And councils have had, so much staff taken out of their institutions that they basically just provide kind of social care and Meals on Wheels these days and childcare for kids that need it. So trying to inject that capacity isn't a quick win. It's going to take quite a lot of time to do that. I mean, the one thing, I've not asked Companies House about this, they might hate it given they've got a lot to do on economic crime and transparency at the moment, but Companies House is an organisation that interacts with the vast majority of companies. Why not give Companies House an innovation arm that allows them to communicate with companies at touch points during the year on regulatory requirements, filing annual accounts, your statements that says, have you thought about these things that might make this stuff easier? And if so, here's where you can find the information. I just think you have to put yourself in the shoes of a business owner. Off the back of COVID, customer habits have changed, work habits have changed, the economy is not in great shape, trade exports are down, lots of companies have ended up in debt through the pandemic when they weren't before, the appetite for investment is difficult, interest rates are high. To come along and say to businesses, I get all of that, but can you do this? It's a bit of a hard sell, and that's why I say you've got to get the whole incentive framework right around information. Yes, kind of funding or some form of incentive around finance, but also access to information, advice and support that is independent of vested interest, that is trusted, that is available to all companies in some form across the country in a way that works for them within their working kind of practice. And I just don't think that that's a kind of Treasury-led initiative or a combined authority initiative or a council initiative. I think it's something like Companies House, maybe Chambers of Commerce, but not all businesses plug in. There has to be something different than what we've tried before, because everything we've tried before has failed.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about digital skills and education. And it's talked about quite a lot in the tech sector, but I'd like to speak more broadly as well, because I feel like there's a concentration of the top UK talent in tech companies. And so how can you encourage a trickle down to companies that maybe aren't necessarily tech companies, but also need to be digital first? Holly?
So I'm obviously going to say digital skills are vital because that's what we do, but I'm seeing the problem starting in secondary schools. When we go in and do schools talks, they don't really understand why they're being taught maths and English and the things that you can do with it. And when we start talking about, well, that means you could learn Python, you could do data science, you could do machine learning, we start bringing maths to life. And they're like, oh, I didn't realise you could do all those amazing things with it. So I think it needs us as businesses to go in and help the education system bring the curriculum to context. And we were working with a local university where they were doing a data science degree. And we were saying, that's great that you're doing that, but also you still need to have an entrepreneurship module because we're finding that students are coming out the other end of the system and they haven't got the basic work-ready skills that we need to sit alongside digital on how we expect them to be in the workplace and how we need them to function. So I think it's really key that schools, colleges and universities really think about those employability skills.
George, how do you foster that kind of employability but also nurture new talent?
So I think there's the demand for skills and the supply of skills as well. So on the demand side, we have a lot of really talented people in the UK who are extremely skilled. And in fact, on statistics from about 2019, 2020, the UK has the highest number of people in the EU who are overqualified for the jobs that they're in. So that's about 1/3 of people in the UK are actually overqualified for their roles. So we're not using currently the skills which are out there. And then on the supply of skills, I absolutely agree with what we just heard. I think that matching those skills to very future-based technologies where we don't know what direction they're going to be in is very hard, but making sure we equip school leavers with those kind of general purpose skills in both maths and science and computing is absolutely essential. And again, just going back to the point that I mentioned, management and business is a real skills gap in the UK. It's not just about specific tech skills, but knowing how to run a business, wanting to go out there and invest and adopt new technologies to make your company run better is pretty critical. Something like 75% of the benefits of innovation are not in process or product innovation, it's in firm organisation and marketing. So the vast majority, the big win for companies in innovation is in that space, and we can do a lot more in skills and training there.
Adam?
So I think one of the elements that's sometimes missed from the digital skills debate is kind of confidence and the ability to use digital skills in different environments. The Good Things Foundation did some really good research recently that showed that young people who at home might be extraordinarily confident with digital skills, kind of reprogram Netflix or something when it breaks, would be extremely unlikely to deploy the same level of creativity in an office environment, right? They'd be nervous to do so. Which comes back to George's point about management. If we want people to be able to realise skills that they might have in a personal environment or have picked up in an educational environment, in a professional environment, we need firms that have the space for people to innovate, to experiment, to try new things without necessarily fear of reprimand or what might happen if that doesn't work out. And I think that is sometimes difficult for firms to do when they're experiencing the pressures that Darren is. But support to help them do that, to create that environment, I think is key.
Can I just add something? I forgot to say, it's very hard for businesses to access the levy as well. If you want to go down the apprenticeship route, it's so difficult, especially for a small business trying to navigate that. And then you have to create yet another government gateway portal. I've lost how many I've got with all the different services. So I think, can we please just do something about that to make it easier for people to take on students and our young bright stars?
Universal agreement from Think Tank Corner on that.
Andreas?
Yes, I think, on that note, Holly, I think I think we're the biggest employer in the Northeast after the government. So we take, as a big business, I think we take a big responsibility in terms of what we can do at a kind of local level in any market that we operate to try and foster some of those skills that we or our industry might need. So we put our money where our mouth is, and we'll fund, programs with local institutions, the Institute of Engineering and Science, that then breeds kind of local skills. But I think it goes, in terms of the overall kind of UK challenge, I think it goes beyond, I think the example I gave you before we came out is you don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car. So I think the kind of specific digital and technology skills are kind of one thing that we need to have people employed building great products and services for the market. But then coming back to what we spoke about before, generally when you're dealing with small businesses, it comes back to a lot around those general sort of business skills that that get people confident and proficient enough to then be able to apply the tools to be better marketers or keep on top of their numbers, whatever they might be.
Do you think that there are incentives for people to be digitally skilled?
No. No, I don't. Because again,
apart from the high salaries if you go and work in big tech.
If you're very lucky, yeah. I mean, we've talked about putting yourself in the shoes of the business owner. Put yourself in the shoes of the worker. My hunch, I've not tested this, but my hunch is that if you asked a group of workers what their views were about technology and digital adoption, they'd probably be quite fearful because they don't probably really know what it means, whether they have the skills to do it, whether that's going to make them lose their job, and therefore the incentives are wrong because they don't want to adopt the skills and the technology. And you end up in this situation where I've had businesses before the committee who bring in technology to improve productivity, what we want, but they don't involve workers in the discussion from the very start, and it ends up being exploitative. It's about productivity gains for the bottom line, for the profit margin, without really setting out the incentives for the worker. And you have to have an inclusive rollout of technology in the workplace that involves the worker as well as the business. On the question around skills, I don't think the problem statement is digital skills. I think the problem statement is skills. I mean, we have no skills policy in this country outside of kind of mandatory education. And yes, we should look at school curricula. My nervousness about that is that you keep adding more and more stuff onto teachers. They themselves need access to training and skills to teach these things in the first place. FE colleges don't get the financing they need to hire the staff or the kit to be able to train people with any sense of security. At higher education, some institutions are pretty good, but then that's kind of quite a small percentage of people. You look at workers in the workplace, other than maybe in the best businesses, and say to them, where would you go to get training or skills development? I mean, I don't think anyone would know. I mean, there's nowhere to go. And if your employer's not paying for it because after the banking crisis or austerity or Brexit uncertainty or COVID, you've cut back your training budget, and there's nowhere from the state to go to get access. I mean, again, the incentive framework is just entirely wrong. And the thing that I always encourage my colleagues on a cross-party basis to think about in Westminster is don't just try to use the old levers to solve these problems because they evidently don't work. Primary legislation, treasury voucher, national curriculum change. I mean, they're not delivering the outcomes. And please don't just announce a round number of £150 million for something, name something, when you have no idea what the outcomes are or how you even got to the £150 million. Can we go in the reverse direction, kind of diagnose the problems, specify the solutions, set out what you think success will look like, and then figure out how much it's going to cost and announce it as opposed to the other way around?
We've got about 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to see if anybody in the audience had any questions. And if you can also direct your question to a panelist specifically, because we are short on time. This lady here.
Thank you. Frances Clark from VMware. So mine's directed at Darren Jones. So you talk about businesses across the economy needing to be upskilled. What about government itself? Because these are the policymakers making the skills. Do you recommend that they need to be taught as well? Because these are the policymakers that make the laws and the legislations that then translate onto the private sector that they have to act upon. Do you think more education needs to be done at the state and institutional level?
Yes is the short answer. And I'm sorry to be so rude, but hi, Sue. I saw you behind. I just walked away. I work with Sue in my constituency, so you get a special hello. What is Westminster? It's Westminster and Whitehall, right? So there are a load of us that are elected politicians, and then there are officials. There's unelected politicians as well. We should include them. There are lords and obviously MPs, and then there's officials. Officials need access to training and skills. They need to think about how you design products better in the way that I've suggested. There are very, very few officials that come from a tech background or understand these types of issues. And politicians often rely on the officials to know what the politicians don't know. So yes, there's a big job there. And also there's, through public sector reform, which has to happen because we can't afford our public services at the moment, hence the national debt, their work is going to change as well. If you're delivering a customer-facing public service, or if you're in a back office function in Whitehall, that needs to change as quickly as the private sector. So yes. At the political level, yeah, I mean, I think there should be more politicians that kind of understand these issues and think about it. But also, we're supposed to be generalists and also representative of society. Now, I probably couldn't tell you very much at all about how to reform the social care system. I haven't got the foggiest, but I know one of my colleagues will, whereas one of my colleagues probably wouldn't have any view on what an LLM is, whereas I do. And so it's not that for all politicians to have to like know an expert level of stuff about everything, but I would encourage many of you to stand for Parliament and come and help us out at the next election.
Thank you. Any more questions? This gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Henry Parker from Logically AI. Slightly stepping out of the focus of the session, but I was really encouraged to hear that you know what an LLM model is. It's really, really good to hear. And that does lead me to a question about, I'm afraid, the piece in The Guardian today about the approach that Labour might take to regulating AI.
I've not read it. You have to tell me what it is.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, it seems to me that the article, if you read it literally, would suggest that Labour wants to move towards the idea of regulating specific types of AI, like LLMs, through a licensing model, whereby companies and developers that build them would be licensed to do so. I mean, as you've not read the piece, probably not fair. I hadn't read it when I was asked in your place today. Same question, so it's absolutely fine.
Just extending the pain. It's really good.
I'm just passing on the favour. I mean, as somebody I know and who worked for BT, as I previously did, you know about these issues. Off the cuff, what is your impression of that approach? Would you say there are advantages and disadvantages to that? Or would you say we need to move towards a more use case-based model, given that you know the distinctions and you understand this?
Sure.
What's your view on that?
So having not read the article and having not asked the question of my colleagues, my assumption is that as I don't know that that is our policy, it is probably not our policy. It's probably something that someone has said that's been reported, I suspect. And what I can say is that Labour will be saying much more on tech policy later this year. And as a consequence of that, I don't think we're yet in a position where we're actually announcing kind of fully nailed down policy. So I don't know who the journalist is or what the context was, but I suspect it might be more kind of conjecture and narrative than it is policy.
I think there was a briefing from Labour to journalists, actually.
Was there?
Yeah.
Oh, God, okay. Well, but the briefing...
The licensing issue is slightly separate.
Okay. In which case, let me give you my personal view. Oh, good. I'm sure there's a journalist in the room somewhere. I'm going to get myself in trouble now. I'm not sure the state has the capacity to do that effectively. And I think there are other things that the state should be doing. For example, some of the stuff around government oversight of very high-risk AI developments, where I think there's a role for us to partner with the private sector. My general view on AI regulation, AI licensing, lots of stuff, is it's just so amorphous. You're going to end up doing kind of whack-a-mole policy. Because actually the high-risk stuff that's been in the press a lot recently is probably easier to manage than the actual disruptive impact of AI on whole swathes of the economy. And we're not going to end up in a position, I don't think, where an official and a regulator is going to be licensing an AI application for primary care and in a certain part of the private sector and in the Justice Department and in a defence company. I just don't think we have the capacity to do that. And I don't think we're going to draft legislation for those particular outcomes because there'll be too many of them and it'll be very hard for us to anticipate what that will actually mean when it's rolled out properly. So I suspect, and again, this is my personal view, we'd want to end up in a much more nimble position that means that we can harness the opportunities of innovation in this country, both for UK PLC and for exports, but also mitigates the risks that many people will be concerned about.
Sounds absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you.
I'd just like to ask on the AI point as well, and you touched upon it earlier, I guess the tensions in adopting new technologies and when there are genuine concerns about replacement of jobs and things like that, even though we heard earlier that often tech does create more jobs in the long term. How can you navigate that friction where workers are really scared about adopting technology because it can change their entire roles? George, do you want to go first? And briefly, each of you, please.
I think it's a really difficult question. I think clearly most of the cases where workers are going to be made unemployment by the adoption of technology, they're not going to have a say in it, which is already a problem. But I'm pretty gloomy about the effect of AI on the UK economy. I think we're already stuck in a low wage, low productivity trap, which means that we're going to struggle to adopt the kind of the AI applications that will give significant benefits to us in terms of productivity and growth. And I think we have a service-heavy economy, which is now the sector of the economy which is going to be most exposed to automation. We saw through the 70s, 80s, 90s automation of manufacturing, but now these kind of knowledge economy jobs, legal clerks, accountants, etc., who are likely to be made unemployed through this. And the UK is particularly exposed through that. So I think balancing it is actually one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. And I don't have a particularly smart answer, but I'm equally not willing to enter like a gloominess race with some of the people who are really skeptical about this. But I do think it's going to be a really major challenge for us.
Anybody else care to chip in?
I just want to add from what I've seen, because we do data analytics and machine learning, is that, yeah, we do get that pushback from the workforce, but we try and put the positive element on it of, actually, if we implement this, we're going to enable you to free up doing data entry. You can actually analyse the data. You've got real-time reports that you can report on. You can be doing more strategic things with your time. So your job will still be there, but it will be a different job. So we try and put the positive spin on it and how you can embrace AI into your organisation.
Great, thank you. And we are out of time. So there's so much to dig into here. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and we'll be enjoying some final words as well.
So much, Christina. Thank you very much to the panel. It says here, Anthony, to do closing remarks and short summary of the day. My short summary of the day is we started talking about AI and we finished talking about AI. But in the middle, we talked quite a lot about using technology with purpose, which is the real thing that I was keen that we talk about today. That's my summary. I do need to say some thanks, though. First of all, I want to say thanks to the team here at the conference centre, to the AV team at the back, and to the catering team. But of course, I particularly want to thank all my colleagues who put today's event together. I'd like to thank Neil and Catherine and Laura for their fantastic chairing of some of the panels today. I'd like to thank Margot and Mary for the event organisation. I'd like to thank Margarita, who's been dealing with a lot of press interest in what we've been talking about today. And I'd like to thank Ed and Alice, who have been the masterminds behind the agenda. And I hope it has been a really stimulating and enjoyable agenda. Sometimes the team say to me at Tech UK, they sort of say, how do we know at Tech UK when we're winning? How do we know when we're getting it right? And I always say there are three things. It's about being relevant, about being credible and influential. And I certainly hope that today's discussion has been relevant. I think we've had a lot of credibility in the room in terms of people who really know their stuff. I will leave it to you to decide whether we're influential. And I'd now like to invite you all for a drink. Thank you very much.